Well, welcome again to day 2 of the 15th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment. I'm Bob Hales. I'm your moderator. Don't forget, Wall Street Journal has a workshop coming up right after this session. Be nice if you were to at least check it out for a few minutes, not longer. Also, don't forget the recordings from not just this year, but all the previous years are available to all of you. We'll have over 700 session recordings that you as attendees can take a look at. Our session now is the course innovation checklist, creating an experience in student learning. We have with us Heather Keith, who's the Executive Director of Faculty Development and a Professor of Philosophy at Radford University. Her teaching and research interests include ethics, wicked problems, that's a new one, American philosophy, and holistic faculty and student success. Well, this should be fun. Let's turn it over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Bob. I hope it'll be fun. As I noted in the chat, feel free to throw in your institutional affiliation if you like, and your position if you like. I am hoping that we've got a mix of faculty developers and instructional technologists and perhaps some faculty in the audience today. This will be interactive. I'm going to be asking you in the presentation to talk about some ways that you innovate or some ways that you help faculty on your campus innovate. So welcome everybody, and we will get started. So on our agenda today, I'm going to talk really briefly about why a checklist, why we should innovate, what our innovation goals should be, but then most of the presentation will be on how to innovate in our courses and curriculum. And ideally that will be for you, if you're faculty, things that you can do or that you're already doing that you want to mention, or if you are an instructional designer or instructional technologist or faculty developer, some ways that you can help faculty to think more holistically about teaching and learning in terms of innovation. This all started in my own office of teaching and learning in helping ourselves as instructional designers and faculty developers to get out of the box, as we say, out of the COVID Zoom box, even though we are still using Zoom really effectively for things like this and for teaching and learning, but really to get out of that COVID box of feeling very constrained, to push the limits on our teaching, and to really get out there and meet students where they are around ideas that they're intensely, passionately interested in. I'll talk about one or two innovation examples, but I'm going to be relying on you as well to talk about how you innovate in your courses and curriculum. All right, so why a checklist? As I said, during COVID, as COVID began to wane on our campus, my office started thinking about getting out of the constraints of COVID teaching, but taking the things that we learned about holistic student success during COVID and resilient and flexible teaching and learning, and really figuring out how we can share with faculty ways that they can be innovative again, that they can regain that spark and passion for teaching and learning, and to really engage with students on that level. So really for us, it's a way to put all of our best teaching and learning into one place and to get faculty to think outside of that box. And that just to me is thinking holistically about teaching and learning. So thinking about faculty as humans, thinking about students as humans, and really thinking about how we engage and relate with our students around ideas that we're passionate about. So the checklist is just our way of putting all of that in one place, sharing it out with faculty, and having all of our best techniques in one place. And it is an actual checklist, which I will share with you, and you would be free, if applicable, to use it on your campus. All right, so why innovate? This to me comes down to my interests in teaching and learning. I'm a philosopher at heart and in practice. So when I teach, it's in the philosophy classroom. And one of my research interests is in John Dewey's philosophy of education. And John Dewey and his, what I call his education aesthetics, so taking his aesthetic theory plus his philosophy of education together, talked about education ideally being a consumatory experience. So think of it in a classroom, even during a lecture or during a more active learning environment. Students are so consumed by the experience of their learning that it's like they're sitting through a fantastic theater experience, a movie or a play, or a fantastic musical experience, listening to their favorite song. I always ask students at the beginning of the semester to tell me their walk-up songs, like in baseball. Like, what's that song? If you were walking up to do a great thing, what would that song be? And I encourage them, like, listen to that song on the way to class, because that'll get you in the mood for the experience that we're going to have. And sometimes I play their walk-up songs at the beginning of class. But it's John Dewey talked about this consumatory experience where students are fully engaged in the process of learning. And so I'm always interested in my own teaching. How do I get to that level in my teaching so that students want to play that walk-up song when they're coming to class? Because class is going to be an experience, Dewey called it, a consumatory experience, something that stands out to them in their day, rather than something that they're looking at their watches just trying to get through. I'm also really interested in liberatory education. So getting away from what Freire called the banking metaphor of education, where we give information and students give it back to us on the exam, and we have that transactional experience, to really thinking about preparing our students for diverse, unknown to us and to them right now, liberating careers and lives. So using education to transform their lives in a positive way and to create transformation on the communities that they touch. Also interested in radical pedagogy. So thinking about Bell Hooks, that education is that practice of freedom. And as such, she said, in Teaching to Transgress, education should never be dull. It should always be exciting, the thing that stands out to students most in their day. I'm also interested in creating students with a sense of authority, that they are problem solvers in the world. And I take this from Paul Hanstedt's Creating Wicked Students, where he talks about sort of a wicked problems approach to teaching. I'll talk a little more about wicked problems in a minute, but wicked problems are just those huge, difficult, complex, sticky problems of our time, like climate change, persistent inequality, transforming the education system, the imprisonment system in our country, war, inequity. So problems that don't have easy solutions, don't really have solutions at all, and that don't have one way of dealing with them. You've got to come at them from multiple ways. So think about climate change. Climate change is an issue for biologists, but it's also an issue for ethicists and philosophers. It's an issue for linguists and sociologists and political scientists. It's an issue for folks in our colleges of business as well. So difficult, big problems that have multiple ways of looking at solutions. Those are wicked problems. And wicked students are students who are adept at working together to engage these kinds of problems. So I'm thinking about teaching and learning that gives students those skills for solving wicked problems. And then also in a teaching center, I'm always thinking about active learning, how to just really engage students, to meet them where they are, and to really help them think about their own learning and their own ownership over that learning. We also know from recent studies that we can throw all of our best lecturing and content development at students, and they will learn those things in a survey class. But if we use our best active learning elements where students are peer educators, where they're teaching each other, where they're sharing ideas, where we are collaborating together, that even if we cover less content, students learn better and learn more and do better later on in their education. So I'm thinking about active learning as well. All right, so some innovation goals that we use in my teaching and learning office. We want students to learn via greater engagement. So this is about student learning. We want them to build those skills that I was talking about as skills in the discipline, skills for good citizenship, skills for career readiness. So thinking about the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE, their core competencies, things like collaboration and teamwork, critical thinking, communication skills, inclusion skills, and whether we're meeting those in our classes. Also thinking about visibility, so creating interest and visibility in our courses and programs among other students. I don't necessarily talk about it this way with faculty, but a lot of what we're doing really is marketing to students. Why teaching and learning in our disciplines and courses is important, and why they should be really excited to take more classes with us. That should be all of our goals. But also increasing visibility among other campus stakeholders, increasing visibility in the public as well. I talked for a minute about creating wicked students, Paul Hanstead, and he has the idea that we should be creating more authority in our students. So they're not passive learners, they're active learners, and then they in turn can go out and teach concepts to others and can solve problems. So we're really creating citizens in every class that we teach who are able to enact solutions individually and in teams to these complex, wicked, intractable problems of our time. I also think about teaching and learning in terms of opening horizons. So I was once talking with a philosopher of education that I admire about my role in general education and how assessment is sometimes difficult because it's like a different language. And if you've done assessment, you know that there is a language to it, and that sometimes it's hard to think of a class and the students you've affected in terms of quantifiable measurement, right? And he said, well, you need to do that, and it's important, and you really can measure teaching and learning, and here's how to do that. But you also need to understand that teaching is an art, and it's about opening horizons. So unless you can count how many horizons you have opened in the lives of students in one day, then it's a little difficult sometimes to assess that, but we have to know that it's always there, right? And some of those horizons are going to be open 10 years down the road. So when I think about teaching and learning, I am thinking about measurable skills that we can work with students on and then find out if they're learning those things, but also about how this might affect them 10 years down the road. And I think great teaching and learning keeps that in mind. So really creating students with open horizons who love learning, who can envision themselves multiple possibilities in engaging with others. And then finally, thinking about agency, and that's all about us as faculty and as teachers. So giving faculty members agency to experiment, to really shine, to find their own passion, to contribute meaningfully to their field and to the students, as well as the social and ecological ecosystems around us. So making an impact in a way that we're passionate about is one of our innovation goals as well. So that is a lot on the goals, but now let's really approach what we're talking about here. So innovative course design, it's this, I'm a philosopher, I teach logic, so it's all about Venn diagrams. And here we are. Your passion and ability as faculty members, as instructors, as people who work with faculty, with what students need, it's those skills, it's that content knowledge, with what the world needs. And the world needs problem solvers, people who can work through political polarization so that they can collaborate and work together on solving the problems of our time. So it's that intersection of our passion and ability as educators, what students need in their education, and what the world needs from us in our educational institutions. And then added to that, and this is my favorite part, your own sphere of influence, that is what you can get away with. So what you can get away with really in getting out of the box on your campus, and we'll circle back to that a little bit. I think that's where the fun really begins. All right, so I'd like to ask you, as we're talking about some examples of how you innovate or how you would like to innovate or how you would like to share this with other faculty on your campus. So it could be about the topic, it could be about the way that you're teaching, it could be about the curriculum itself. But I'd like you to ask yourself where that intersection is for you of those three spheres of what you have to offer, what students need, and what the world needs from us, how that might work its way into your work in teaching and learning. All right, so these are some of the things, some elements of innovation, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of these things. But these are the core ideas in the checklist that we use in my office. So we think of everything from topic to how we teach, to the curriculum, to building community in the classroom, to student success and resilience, inclusion and belonging, of course, the outreach that we're able to do through our teaching and learning, the assessment of figuring out how we're doing things and how we can do them better. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of having some campus champions, and then how to share and publicize your work outside of the classroom. And then right back in an iterative response to doing it again. So I'm going to unpack some of these things a little bit. Okay, so topic. I always ask myself when I'm teaching, even if it's a catalog course that I have to teach like ancient philosophy, I always think about the topic. Is it worth offering? So is it worth just offering students a class called Ancient Philosophy and then they sign up and they take it? For some students, it is. Some students want to know about the history of our ideas. And so they'll jump in, or they might be a major and they have to take it. But I want to teach a class, even if it's ancient philosophy, that's going to speak to a lot of people and is going to seem worthwhile to them, even if it never, ever occurred to them to read Plato in their lives. I want them to know that reading Plato can have a positive effect on the world and on their lives. So I think about topics. Is this a course worth offering? If I can bring in some wicked problems topics like gun violence in the United States, war, human trafficking, climate change, I do. And it may be that I can create a whole class based on that topic. For example, I teach a wicked problems class on climate change regularly. But maybe it's just bringing in some of those themes throughout the semester in your survey class, whether it's ancient philosophy or intro to biology or marketing 101. What can I bring in to make this worthwhile to students, even if some of them didn't really intend to find themselves in a marketing class, but they had to do it for one reason or another. And then also we can think about not just wicked problems topics, but what are the cutting edge topics in our field? If you're teaching computer science, I imagine that artificial intelligence is a big deal right now and might be a thing you can build a whole class around or just bring into survey classes that you already teach. When I work with faculty, I ask the question also, can you teach it? So there are a lot of things I would like to teach because I think they're huge, wicked problems. But am I qualified to teach all of those things? Not necessarily. So either I'm going to commit to learning along with the students and being transparent about that, or I'm going to step back and focus on something that I'm both passionate about and can teach. And then I always ask the question, will students take it, or how do you get them to take it? If it's an ancient philosophy course on my campus, we don't have a huge number of philosophy majors, so I rely on other students to fill those seats so that we can continue to offer courses. So I think about, how do I get students into this classroom? Maybe I'm gonna plaster some walls with posters on what problems we're gonna discuss in this class. Maybe I'm gonna do a social media campaign about it, try to get word out to students so that they know that ancient philosophy is actually something that might be really useful and interesting to them. I think everyone should love ancient philosophy, but I know that not everyone does until they read it. So I ask faculty to really think about the topic when they're innovating. Of course, in teaching and learning centers, we like faculty to think about their pedagogy as well. And it's another way to innovate. And we learned a lot of this during COVID, that we have to find new ways to reach our students and engage them. So I work with faculty on shaking things up. So you've got your innovative topic. How can you innovate in the classroom as you're working with students on that topic? For me, I've been doing a couple of semesters experiments on ungrading. And I'm really trying to track how students are doing with that process. And I'm very transparent with students that this is an experiment and we'll see how it goes. Maybe it's competency-based grading in your class. I ask faculty to try to problematize what they're doing. So focus really on problem or project-based learning in a classroom, even if it's a traditional humanities course. How can we get students collaborating, teaching each other the content? create students as authorities. Maybe it's bringing students in as peer instructors, maybe for the whole semester, or maybe just have a different peer instructor each day. And that student works with you on the content for that day and then shares the prospects of engaging with the other students in the class with you. Maybe it's building team projects, or as Hansted talks about, building signature assessments. Maybe your class does a poster session at the end of the semester to offer ideas to the general public. Maybe they write a policy paper together. Maybe they do an experiment together. Maybe they go out into K-12 and do an experiment with K-12 kids under your guidance. Really thinking about pedagogy from giving the students skills. And as a philosopher, of course, skills for me are things like critical thinking, but also content knowledge. Socratic inquiry is a skill that I think we can teach to our students. Maybe it's teamwork or using technology, but being transparent. These are the things you're learning in this class. Scaffolding important work in the classroom, another message from COVID. So giving students a lot of low stakes opportunities to fail forward. And if you're experimenting with something like ungrading, I highly suggest doing this so that students know what it feels like to fail before they actually fail a class, right? They know what it feels like to not get something turned in when they needed to have done it for that day, and then they get another opportunity to make it right later. So scaffolding that work, giving them lots of low stakes or no stakes opportunities to learn from mistakes and to really calibrate toward the kind of work that you're expecting in the class. Getting students out into the field, into the community, doing community-based learning, service learning, even if it's service learning on campus, getting them out of the traditional idea that I teach it, they learn it, they give it back to me on an exam, that there are different ways of using their learning that are useful and relevant. And literally for me, getting students out of the classroom is important. So doing activities with students that are outdoors sometimes, or using our campus as a laboratory. When I teach my Wicked Problems class on climate change, we spend time in our social media lab. We spend time in our campus greenhouse. We spend time down at the river that is on our campus. We spend time looking at trees on campus and talking about effects of climate change. We get out in the community. And pictured here is my Wicked Problems class doing a sort of a Wicked Problems activity on how all of the various aspects of climate change are intertwined. And students present that idea and then they throw yarn around. And then at the end, we talk about the web that we've made and how we begin to unravel it. They actually have to work together to unravel it at the end. And then finally, as we learned from COVID, good pedagogy means being present, being human, being humane, working with students on their own resilience, working with them on flexible teaching, and really approaching our students where they are in this era that we're living in. As a parent of a middle schooler and watching what happened at home during COVID and what students are still struggling with coming up through middle and high schoolers, I really feel that in my work with our college freshmen and sophomores the last couple of years, the different experience they had as high schoolers. So really being present with our students, finding ways to be there for them, not just being a sage on the stage, but taking the time to get to know them, to find out about them, to learn about their lives and experiences, and being available to them, whether it's having office hours as a walk on campus rather than them coming to my office or meeting in the coffee shop, but finding ways to be humane and present with students. Innovation can also be about the curriculum, not just about individual courses or how we're teaching, but thinking about whether we're teaching courses in general education or whether we can innovate around general education. Can we create, if we're having an opportunity on campus to rethink general education, could we recreate it around themes? At a previous position, I worked at an institution that had as its mission sustainability. And so the general education program taught skills that were college-ready skills, lab sciences and a philosophy class and a writing class and a history class, social science classes, but they were all around sustainability themes. So the philosophy class students took was an environmental ethics class. Social science classes were around things like ecological psychology. So taking something like a core curriculum or even a departmental curriculum and theming it, creating a core mission, can really engage students around solving problems. You can do this in a department. Is there room in your department for a way for a student to sort of self-design, to work their way through a program of study that is not necessarily the traditional path that we're offering? Are there ways to do that in a transdisciplinary fashion? Because we know, even from career readiness, that employers are looking for students who can work across boundaries and across disciplines and can think for themselves and can collaborate with all different kinds of people. Can we recreate that outside of our traditional silos by offering students a transdisciplinary way to work through our curriculum, perhaps around wicked problems themes? Can we find ways to innovate our course design, not just the topic in our pedagogy, in summer courses, short courses, travel courses? I've had great experiences teaching blocked or linked courses. So a block course could be where a student takes 5 courses around a common theme. Maybe it's restructuring education in our country. And those courses might come from psychology, education, philosophy and ethics. They could come from sciences, looking at science curriculum, and having students take those with 5 different faculty, but around the same theme and the same set of students. And then you can take those students extensively into the field as well if they're all taking the same classes together. Or linked courses where you have 2 courses that are just linked together. So maybe it's the same roster of students, but 2 faculty teaching around the same topic. I had a great experience teaching a class called The Problem of Evil from a philosophic and religious perspective with a psychology professor teaching psychology of evil at the same time. We had the same 25 students. Sometimes we co-taught, but most of the time we taught our separate courses and the students made the links between the 2. And then also pop-up courses. And I've got an example of a pop-up course that I taught here. And a pop-up course could be a half or 1 credit course that is offered almost immediately. So in this case, in February 2018, as you know, was the mass shooting at a high school in Florida. Unfortunately, these events seem to happen more and more. And at the time, 3 faculty got together and we said, I don't want to wait until next semester to try to work this into my course that I'm teaching. This is relevant and important. It's happening now. We need to get out in front and work with our students on this as responsible educators. So between February and April, in exactly 2 months, we were able to work through our own curriculum committees on campus to create the possibility of a pop-up course that could occur during the semester that we envisioned it. So by April, we were able to offer a 1 credit pop-up course that we called Never Again, or hashtag 2A for Second Amendment, with 3 faculty, 1 from psychology, myself from philosophy and ethics, and another faculty member from forestry who was a hunting teacher as well, a gun safety educator. And we were able to offer a course over 2 weeks' time. It met intensively. We brought in all kinds of guest speakers. We were actually able to bring in the kinds of weapons that were used in shootings like this. Students did big projects where they presented information outside of the class. And we were able to do it almost immediately. So that's a pop-up course. Some campuses do it where you can, before the semester, right up until the semester starts, schedule a pop-up course that students can take. Some campuses do it as we did, where you can do it almost immediately with students. So small intensive courses that spring up in response to wicked problems, for example. So those are some ways to innovate at the curriculum level. Of course, innovation should always think holistically about belonging and success of our students. So these are things we work with our faculty on anyway. So taking the time in class to build community, pictured here is a freshman seminar where we took students out to our Low Ropes Challenge course and had them work together on some challenge projects like, the fiery lava pit that they were all trying to walk across in this picture. but really taking the time to build community in the class so that when students approach those wicked problems, they approach them collaboratively rather than warring with each other about differing viewpoints. We want them to have those differing viewpoints, but we want them to bring them together to effectively solve problems. So thinking about teamwork and building actual teamwork skills into the semester during class. And then really working, as I said, toward that cohesion around solving problems. I always tell my students, in a philosophy class, we're going to talk about a lot of controversial issues, but the issues are the problems. We are not the problems. We are working together across our diverse viewpoints toward solving those problems. We also talk about student success and resilience a lot with our faculty. So again, COVID taught us to think about flexibility and resilience with our students, and always working with students transparently and in the classroom on the availability of resources. So if I'm teaching a class where I think students would benefit from tutoring, I bring those tutors into the classroom to set up meetings with students. If I think that there are wellness concerns, which there inevitably are in any class that we teach these days, I make sure that those resources are available to students transparently, and I talk about them a lot in the classroom to make sure that students know about those resources. And then finally, inclusion and belonging. So really thinking about inclusive pedagogy, getting to know our students' names and pronouns, using a diversity of materials so that all of our students can see themselves in our field, writing an inviting syllabus that really respects the knowledge of students and brings them in, calls them into the work that we're doing with them, and giving explicit reminders that students belong in the course and that they can be successful. So maybe they failed one of those low stakes assignments that I gave early in the semester, reminding them that they do belong in the course and that they can be successful, and that my job is to help them to see that success over time. So always thinking about belonging and the success of our students. And in innovating our courses, we also want to think about outreach. So how will our coursework intersect with the world? And that's bringing in this relevance and passion for students. So figuring out how we can partner in the community. Even if you're teaching a history course, it's a history survey, and it might seem hard to think about service learning, thinking about how we can serve our community, maybe by doing an oral history project for the local community. Thinking about how we can serve our campus. So when I do my Wicked Problems course on sustainability, I always partner with our campus sustainability office to see what we can do during that semester to help the sustainability efforts on campus. Or what can we do in the local environment? Maybe there's a cleanup operation going on in your community that students can be involved with, because it not only connects their learning to the community, but it builds those collaboration and teamwork and problem-solving skills together as a class. And then also thinking about outreach to an external audience. We have a new initiative on our campus that we call it our Wicked Fest. And it's all classes that are involved in some kind of wicked problems. Teaching comes together twice a year in November and April, and we have a poster presentation where all of our classes have team projects and they present their work. And we had over 300 students presenting on wicked problems this past November, where they're presenting to an external audience, and we have the news media come in. We have a lot of other faculty and students come in. They also act as an audience for each other. We split it up into 2 sessions so that they do their project during a session, and then they go to other projects during a second session. But students get the practice then of connecting with other people around their learning. So thinking about outreach is part of our course innovation approach. And then, of course, we have to talk about assessment. And I see a question in the chat about incorporating outreach for online students, which I think is a great question. I think there are a lot of opportunities to present. Zoom gives us that opportunity in a great way. For example, but students can also present, even if they're remote, students can present in their own communities. I once worked in a program that was primarily online and remote, where students would come for a short residency, but then most of their work would be online, but they all had projects in their own communities. So we worked with them on developing those outreach opportunities where they were at. Not all together as a class in that way, but separately the students were able to do that kind of outreach. And I see another question in the chat on helping students to engage with the controversies of our time, and whether I promote or discourage specific practices for creating safe online spaces, microaggressions, limiting escalation on our highly politicized topics. That is my everyday experience in teaching ethics, and one that I have not perfected, but I hope that over 25 years of teaching ethics, I'm getting better at each time. One of the things that I do, and this goes back to an inclusion and belonging as well, is I work with the students transparently on our own sort of guidelines of class engagement. So whether you're teaching online and you're using discussion boards, or whether you are teaching in person and you're having discussions in classes, which can get very heated very quickly sometimes, I first always remind students that the problems are the things we are against. We are not against each other. But I also have them come up with sort of the rules and regulations of our discourse in class. Sometimes I'll, if I'm in person, I'll write them on a big sticky piece of paper, and sometimes I'll bring that piece of paper and post it in class if I think we need reminders. But students come up with great, their own great ways of regulating their discourse, and they tend to stick by them if they've collaborated on those. And so I feel my job is to remind them of what they talked about. So I think that's one way you can work with students, but it is a difficult time to teach controversial topics these days. I think that shouldn't prevent us from doing it, but I think we do have to take a lot of stock and also ask a lot of questions of students, give them opportunities to reflect. In my Wicked Problems class, I have students do an assignment every Sunday. They turn it in online, even though we're primarily in person, where I ask them to reflect on their learning of the week. But I also ask them to ask me any questions that didn't come up in class, but that they want to talk about, and then to reflect on how things are going. And I tell them if something happened in class and it concerns you, or it's kind of rubbed you the wrong way, or it's just you're thinking about it and you want to circle back to it, please communicate with that with me. And then I never call a student out in those comments, but I find ways of weaving them into our class community discussions. So I'll say the community has brought forward a problem, and I want to circle back to that. And I want to talk about that a little bit in class and see how we can do better as a community so that everyone has a sense of belonging. All right. So also assessment, very important, keeping in mind that some of our assessment is on those horizons that we're opening that we may not know about immediately. But we want to go, of course, beyond the student evaluations of instruction that we know can be problematic, even though most of us have to do them on our campuses. There are other ways of assessing the quality of our work when we're trying to innovate, especially some of the experimental things that we're doing, like for me, experimenting with ungrading. So I always bring somebody in from my office to do a mid-course review. It's a focus group with students. They spend 15 minutes when I'm not in the room with students, and they ask my students 3 questions. First question, what's going well for your learning? It's always about the learning itself. So it's not about, well, this course meets at 8 a.m. and I don't like that. But what's going well for your learning? What suggestions do you have for your instructor about the learning? And that's a chance for students to say, well, it would help if the faculty member helped us put together more study groups, or did a study guide, or slow down a bit, or maybe could post some things online to help us catch up when necessary. So it's a way for students to make suggestions. And then I always have my colleagues end with, and if I'm doing it for somebody else, I end with, what can you as a class community do to better reinforce your learning in this class? And it ends up being a great discussion where students talk to each other, and they'll say things like, well, it would help if we all did the readings a little more extensively so that we could talk a little bit more in class, or it would help if we reminded each other of those ground rules for discussions a little more often. I always bring somebody in to do a course observation too. I'm not required to, I am tenured faculty, but I always bring somebody in to observe something that I have questions about in my teaching. And that's a great way to do assessment, just to get an outside set of eyes, or better yet, to join a teaching square where you and 3 other faculty members visit each other's classes and then talk about what you saw and what you take away as good ideas that you're going to try in your own classes. You can also do internal surveys or that reflection that I talked about with students to give them a chance to weigh in regularly. And then think about, how do we know students are successful? So we can collect artifacts. So collect some student papers and see if they're meeting some of the skills that we think that we're teaching them in a class. I always try to do this with other faculty. So we'll collect some artifacts and then we'll read each other's artifacts to see how we're doing. We can do peer review against learning outcomes. So we can group together as faculty and really look at the learning outcomes in our classes, collect some of those artifacts, or look at some of the data from our students on exams, let's say, and figure out how successful we're doing at teaching these experiments. And I always suggest working with a team around assessment. So I always think I know how students are doing because I work with them every day very closely. But when I have an outside pair of eyes, either observe my teaching or read some of the work that students are doing against some of my outcomes, I get different feedback that way. And coming to the end of our checklist, one of the most important things you can do around course and curriculum innovation is find the helpers on your campus. So find a campus champion. That might be in your department, could be your department chair, could be a specific college on your campus, or it could be a specific program on your campus. I was really excited about Wicked Problems teaching, so I developed a course for our honors program because they were looking for a new first-year seminar. Then I started talking to other faculty doing similar teaching, and now we have a whole extensive list of Wicked Problems initiatives on our campus. So find people with those commonalities. Find an administrative champion. Maybe it's an associate provost or a department chair or a dean who can get really behind something you want to do. Maybe you want to do pop-up courses on your campus and it seems like it might be administratively difficult. And I can tell you, it is administratively difficult to do something like that. Find somebody to help smooth the way for you. Find some other faculty partners in teaching blocked or linked courses. That's one of the best things I've done for my teaching is to co-teach, team teach with a student peer instructor, or to link courses together. And then do some grassroots organizing. Put out on social media, who else is doing this kind of work on campus? I put out recently, who else is doing like experiments with grading on my campus? I didn't really know what was going on. Some people actually came, we got together and had a meeting and we shared our ideas. Now we're pushing out more of those experiments to other people. And then finally, sharing and publicity is important. So finding ways to share those successes, whether it's sharing it internally in your department or externally, inviting the news media to a big event that you're doing with your students as part of teaching and learning. Getting together with other folks and having a big poster night where students are sharing their work and inviting the community to come to that. Or if you live in a small town like me and you're able to actually get to know some of the local representatives, sharing work to some of the politicians in town so that they know what's going on at the university. And the more that work gets shared out there, the more momentum you have around innovation on your campus, and the more other folks will step into those innovative roles as well. All right, so I've been talking a little bit about this, and I'm not gonna go through all of this, but for example, on my campus, I wanted to do more Wicked Problems teaching, came up with a course, pitched it to our honors program. It's now the first year seminar for our honors program, and other folks are teaching it as well. But it was really just figuring out what are those innovative elements that I want to do and building the course around them. So I know I wanted to do problem-based learning, and a Wicked Problems approach is great for that. If you don't have problem-based learning in a Wicked Problems course, you're probably not teaching Wicked Problems. So I know I wanted to have certain elements of this problem-based learning, and in my class's case, around climate change. I know I wanted to use campus as our laboratory, wanted to really partner up with a lot of people on campus, bring them into the classroom and bring my class out to them. I had a good sense of the learning outcomes I was interested in that fit also with our Gen Ed program. And what I wanted students to be getting out of the course. So of course, built the content and the activities of the course around those learning outcomes, and then really wanted to focus on that theme of climate change in the class. Built a class around these basic ideas and have taught it multiple times, and ideally making it better each time. And as I said, we've pitched that out to other faculty, even from other disciplines, not just from my department, who are now teaching this class as well. effectively on campus. So sometimes it's just a matter of picking a few ways to innovate and building that course around it. All right, and finally, that's a lot. I'm gonna put the actual checklist that we use with our faculty in the chat here in a minute. You are welcome to take it. It's got all the ideas I've talked about. We actually, sit down with faculty and check things off, like which ones do you want to do, and that constitutes our consultation with faculty when they want to innovate in their course. You are welcome to do that as well. If you're an instructional designer or a faculty person and you find it meaningful and interesting, you are welcome to take it and use it for that purpose. But I would love to spend our last couple of minutes hearing some ideas from you, either in the chat or just unmute yourself and say hello, ways that you innovate or ways that you see that you might want to take and try, or any questions that you have. And while you might be thinking about that, I am going to get this document and put it in the chat for you. All right, got some questions in here. Is this tied to any course requirements at your institution? Megan, not quite sure what you mean by that. If you mean the honors course that I taught, the Wicked Problems course, it is the entry course for our honors program, and it fulfills a gen ed requirement as well. But if you meant more about course innovation, doesn't fulfill any specific requirements for our faculty, for example, but more and more faculty are taking some of those experiments and then using them in their tenure review, talking about their impact in teaching and learning and that sort of thing. And feel free to unmic if that does not answer your question at all. Any other questions or ideas? Any ideas how to convince faculty to embrace active learning? That is my everyday work in a teaching and learning center, right? I present them with data on how it's better for their students, that the learning will happen better. I present them with the idea that actually it can be more fun for them as faculty members, and they can feel a partnership with their students around teaching and learning that is rich and invigorating for their teaching. And then we pick specific things that we think will be useful in a biology class or in a marketing class or in a humanities class. And we ask them to experiment on one or two things, and then we help them track their success. And we find that leads them to try more and more things. So the more we can pinpoint something, one thing they can try in an active learning environment, the more likely it is that they will pick that up and try new things, we found. We also create a lot of momentum, and our Wicked Problems approach at our campus has created a lot of that momentum on our campus, and a lot more faculty are simply saying, oh, this seems to be something we're doing. I'm going to kind of get on board with that because it seems to be a direction we're going at our university. So building momentum around active learning can be useful as well. Sometimes we're able to give mini grants for faculty. That's a great way to get faculty in the door, right? To give a mini grant to try a new thing and then let us help assess it over time. Leah, I am writing down your email and I definitely will do that. Any other questions, comments, or ideas we didn't cover that are great ideas? I would be happy for anyone to reach out to me if you have questions or if you weren't able to access the checklist. I'll put my email in the chat. Be happy to talk with anybody or hear about your experiments or hear your ideas to incorporate as well. And thanks everybody for coming.
No, thank you for doing this, Heather. Very, very helpful. And I have to profess my ignorance. I had never heard of wicked problems before.
Actually, it goes all the way back to 1973 in community planning literature. But if you do the Google Analytics search about 5 years ago, you see it skyrocket.
Wow.
And so a lot of folks are talking about that in education, but also in community planning, in community resilience literature as well.
Well, I learned something today. So for that, I greatly appreciate your time. So folks, don't forget, we've got top of the hour workshop from the Wall Street Journal. Give them a few minutes of your time. Appreciate it. So Heather, thank you again. I really appreciate this. We learned a lot.